Hello and welcome. I'm David Robinson, the online editor at The Banker, and today we're looking at China's ongoing economic expansion into Latin America and the wider global implications. It's the cover story for the November issue of The Banker, and with me to discuss this is Kimberley Long, the Asia editor. Kim, China's international expansion plans have made a lot of headlines ever since the country launched its Belt and Road initiative back in 2013, and there have been certainly areas of controversy. What's behind the country's investments in Latin America?
So to start with, the movement into Latin America has been going for quite some time, actually. So around about 2008, with the financial crisis, a lot of Western companies really began to retrench out of the region as they moved back to their home markets. And China found a lot of assets for sale and moved in and purchased them. But really, things have accelerated in the last few years. So, we've seen Chinese investment firms buying up electricity distribution assets of Western investors, for example. And this started before the pandemic, but it's really kind of ramped up in the last year or so. And, Chinese state-owned enterprises are starting to look into making purchases of these kind of assets, which hadn't really been seen as a long-term investment before, but kind of Chinese investors look at these things in a different way and they see the long-term potential for it. But what we're seeing now is more of a move as well into more kind of M&A and the creation of their own projects rather than just buying up existing assets, which is a different change in tact. And while that may be something that is seen across other countries moving into emerging markets or moving across their own borders, with China, it does seem to raise a few eyebrows.
Yeah, so just tell me more about the kind of projects that China is investing in.
So there's a lot of green energy projects, for example. So there's been some huge mega projects created in Latin America to help with the demand for energy. For example, in Brazil, there was a state-owned power investment company investing into wind and solar projects, and Argentina has seen China extend into the construction of a solar park. So we've seen these kind of developments. And then also in Peru, the China Three Gorges company moved in to purchase a mega dam after the Brazilian owners had to sell their assets because of a corruption case at home. So, they've really stepped in to purchase these assets that might otherwise, we don't know who would buy them otherwise, really. But for example, with Three Gorges, they've had their own mega project they created anyway in China and really came over with that knowledge and that capability to take on this huge project and really get it moving and get it working to a high standard. So, there's been some controversy over the purchase of these facilities, but in some cases, the actual Chinese purchasers have actually had a really good case for the purchase. They have a particular specialism or expertise they can use in running them. So, things like this are big projects, but then also as well with the creation of more renewable power projects, there's also the greater demand for the batteries that will hold the energy, and these use lithium. And actually in Latin America, there's around 60% of the world's lithium reserves are found, and particularly in Bolivia as well, which is one of the poorest countries in the region. So again, we've seen China move into that kind of space, into the metals and mining side of things, especially around lithium, because this will actually in turn then help to develop the resources that are needed to make these renewable energy projects work.
What kind of issues or even concerns are raised by China's increasing involvement in the region?
So I think a lot of the concern around China being in Latin America was really coming off the back of the US. And, the Trump administration was not happy about China's operations in most of the world, and particularly not in Latin America, which has always been kind of considered as being the US's back garden. But with the Trump administration, there was a lot of negative rhetoric as well around Latin America, which made a lot of organizations then not want to work with them or cooperate with them. So the Trump administration did try and buy out some debt and also push for some agreements for countries not to work with Huawei, for example, in their telecommunications developments. But, there's been a few other steps since the Biden administration took over. So there was actually a team of officials who visited the region last month, September 2021, to try and find some infrastructure projects they can invest in. And again, while there was some reports around that as well, like the US was really trying to push they were trying to find this and do this in a really positive way and provide better deals and better terms that might be offered by Chinese counterparts. Some of the rhetoric out of Latin America was actually more around saying, well, we want to work with the best partners for us. We're not necessarily going to just choose to work with the US because it's what the US wants. But I think one of the key things that really comes across is this kind of discussion around the contracts. There's been a lot of debate really around what is included in the contracts signed by different countries. And we'd seen this with the Belt and Road project over the last few years, where you would hear of defaults, for example, or debt increases, or countries not being able to pay back their debts. And what we've seen is actually there was a report released earlier this year, which was looking into the contracts and the nature of the contracts that have been signed, not only in Latin America, but across the world. And what you would really see is actually the complexity of these contracts. And while they might not do anything that is actually that unusual or anything that was not particularly legal, for example, it was the way that things were done made them incredibly complex and interwoven. So, for example, there was some really tight cross-default provisions that were included in them, which meant that if there was one default towards one Chinese enterprise, it would actually trigger across all Chinese enterprises. So for an organization that maybe has borrowed a huge amount of money or been given a huge loan from China Development Bank or the China Export-Import Bank, for example, if there was a default then with a Chinese supplier, that would then trigger a default, which, would have a huge ramifications. So it was these kind of terms and provisions that have been making things a lot more complex and a bit more opaque around what actually was demanded of these organizations and the countries when they were paying back their loans. So I think this is probably the key takeaway really from it, is this this kind of level of perhaps controversy around the contracts that have been signed and how things have been done. But overall, there are many projects that China have been involved with where they have been completed successfully and they have brought about the results that were expected, and the projects have been completed, and the power plants have been completed and are providing high quality power and power lines into cities to people who need it. So there's a lot of arguments for and against operating with China, but I think there's more understanding that you have to go into it with your eyes open and an understanding of what is in the contract.
Kim, thank you. The rise of China as a global superpower has implications everywhere, and it's something we will certainly continue to monitor closely on The Banker.